Imagine a place where daylight never enters, not because light does not exist there, but because it is never given the chance to witness. Stone that has stood for centuries has absorbed footsteps, whispers, prayers, arguments, and fear. The air feels dense, as if it holds not only the dust of time, but also words that were never meant to be spoken aloud. And somewhere deeper inside, heavy doors. Not the decorative doors tourists see, different ones, thick, severe, silent, doors that are always closed. The stone walls of the Vatican have always carried a particular weight. They do not shout about power, they simply exist. And that quiet existence presses harder than any proclamation. Within those walls, there is a sense of order that centuries have obeyed, a sense of a system that outlives people, generations, regimes, even wars. And when you stand beside that ancient stone, a strange thought arises. How many stories have remained inside, never allowed to emerge? Silence sounds different there. It is not empty, it is filled, like the pause before an answer that could change everything, like a breath taken before opening a page that cannot be read without consequences. We are used to thinking that history is what is written in textbooks, that the past is known, that secrets, if they ever existed, have long been revealed. But let us be honest. History is not only what happened, it is also what was allowed to be told, what was selected, what was edited, and what was left in the shadows. The Vatican is often described as one of the most closed institutions in human history. And it is not only about religion, it is about time. This institution existed when most modern states had not yet been formed. It witnessed the rise of empires and their collapse. It corresponded with monarchs, influenced decisions, collected letters, documents, testimonies. And it did so for centuries. And so the question naturally arises, if something truly extraordinary occurred in human history, could the Vatican have simply overlooked it? If someone was observing, recording, gathering reports, placing them into files and vaults, who would be more likely to do so? Now let us take one step further. What if humanity is not alone in the universe? Not in the sense of fantasy or cinema, but in the sense of a reality that someone may have already seen, described, and attempted to explain in the language of their own time. What if someone has known about this for far longer than the 20th century, long before radar and satellites? What if strange phenomena in the sky, unexplained lights, objects unlike comets or meteors, were documented for centuries? And here is the most unsettling question. What if the truth has already been written down, but concealed? Hidden not because it does not exist, but because it is too inconvenient, too dangerous, or too disruptive to the familiar picture of the world. If you have ever felt that reality is far wider than what we are shown, then you understand why this subject is so compelling. Sometimes we are drawn to mystery not out of curiosity, but from a deeper sense that somewhere within it there may be an answer. Today we are going to speak about a place surrounded by legend, speculation, rumor, and genuine historical fact. A repository that for decades was known by another name, the Secret Archive, and today is officially called the Vatican Apostolic Archive. And before we move into theories about contact, UFOs, and concealed testimonies, we must understand something essential: what this archive truly is. What is actually stored there? Why so many myths surround it? Why even the word archive in this context sounds almost like a warning? Because if there is any place where truth could lie on paper and remain silent for centuries, one of the first places that comes to mind is the Vatican. When we hear the phrase Secret Vatican Archives, the imagination immediately paints something ominous. Hidden chambers, forbidden books, documents capable of overturning the world. But reality, as it often does, turns out to be both simpler and deeper. The official name of this repository today is the Vatican Apostolic Archive. Previously, it was known as Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum. And here it is important to understand something essential. The Latin word secretum did not mean secret in the modern sense. It meant private or personal. It referred to the Pope's own archive, his personal documents, not a vault designed to conceal sensational truths from humanity. In its modern form, the archive began to take shape in the early 17th century under Pope Paul V. Before that, documents were stored in various locations. Over time, however, it became necessary to centralize the immense volume of papers, correspondence, decisions, and official records. From that point on, the archive became a distinct and organized institution. Today, it is one of the largest documentary collections in the world. By various estimates, the shelves stretch for dozens of kilometers, millions of pages, parchments, letters, protocols, reports, diplomatic correspondence, theological treatises, legal acts. There are documents related to the trial of Galileo, correspondence with European monarchs, letters from Henry VIII, materials from the era of the Crusades, records connected to the Second World War. These are not myths, they are verified historical facts. But something else is important. Despite its scale, the archive is not completely closed. Scholars can request access to materials. However, access is strictly regulated. One must meet academic standards, submit a formal application, and justify the research topic. Even then, only specific historical periods are made available. And this is where speculation begins to grow, because an archive is not a museum, it is a living organism. Not all documents are digitized. Not all are published. Not all have been studied. Some materials become accessible only decades after the events they describe. In 2020, the Vatican opened to researchers documents from the pontificate of Pope Pius XII related to the Second World War. This demonstrates that the archive does gradually reveal its pages, but it does so at its own pace, and it is precisely this controlled and selective access that fuels conspiracy theories. If something is not available right now, does that mean it hides something sensational? Or is it simply a matter of time and procedure? The archive contains correspondence with rulers, diplomatic notes, reports from missionaries across continents. And now consider this. Missionaries traveled the world for centuries. They recorded everything unusual. They described phenomena they could not explain. They documented observations carefully. And here, a subtle but important shift appears. If, within the archives, there are letters about comets, eclipses, celestial signs, if there are reports describing strange lights and unexplained objects in the sky, then the question arises, are these documents limited only to religious interpretation? What if among those papers there is something more than correspondence and theological reflection? And to move closer to an answer, we must understand one more crucial thing: how the Vatican itself approaches the question of extraterrestrial life. When the subject of the Church and extraterrestrials arises, many people automatically imagine firm denial. It seems logical to assume that a religious institution would defend an exclusively human-centered vision of creation. But reality is far more complex. The Vatican has its own scientific institution, the Vatican Observatory. It's one of the oldest astronomical organizations in the world, with origins tracing back to the 16th century. Now, the observatory operates modern telescopes and research facilities, including sites outside of Italy. A significant role in its work has been played by scientists from the Society of Jesus. The Jesuits have long been associated with education and scientific inquiry. Among them were astronomers, mathematicians, and physicists. For these scholars, studying the cosmos was never viewed as a threat to faith. On the contrary, it was seen as a way to more deeply understand the design of the Creator. Over the years, Vatican representatives have publicly stated that the existence of extraterrestrial life does not contradict Christian teaching. The former director of the observatory, Father José Gabriel Funes, openly said that if intelligent beings exist elsewhere in the universe, they too would be part of God's creation. In that sense, faith is capable of embracing such a possibility. The official position does not reject the hypothesis of life beyond Earth. It allows for it. It even reflects on its theological implications. Within theological discussions, questions have been raised. Would other intelligent beings possess a soul? Would they require redemption? Is Christ the Savior only of humanity or of the entire universe? If the Church allows for the possibility of extraterrestrial life, does that mean the question has been studied for a long time? After all, astronomy in the Vatican isn't a recent development. Observations of the heavens have been conducted for centuries. Stars and unusual phenomena were recorded with remarkable precision. Could some of those observations have included phenomena that went beyond conventional astronomy? Could certain reports have entered the archives not merely as theological reflections, but as carefully documented events? Imagine a chronicle describing a strange object moving against the wind, a light suspended above a city, a celestial phenomenon that doesn't fit known natural processes. In the Middle Ages, such an event would have been called a sign or a miracle. And if such descriptions truly exist, where would they be preserved? The answer seems obvious: in the archive. Long before radar, satellites, and cameras, people were already looking at the sky with the same sense of wonder we feel today. The sky has always been a vast screen upon which events unfolded, both terrifying and awe-inspiring. And everything unusual that appeared overhead was recorded in chronicles, monastery annals, letters, and personal diaries. Medieval sources contain descriptions of fiery wheels moving across the heavens, glowing spheres hovering above cities, celestial battles in which luminous objects seemed to collide in the air. For the people of that era, these were signs, warnings, divine messages. In 1561, in the German city of Nuremberg, a printed broadsheet depicted a strange celestial event, numerous spheres and cross-shaped forms appearing to struggle in the sky. A few years later, in 1566, a similar phenomenon was described in Basel. At the time, such events were interpreted through religious symbolism, as heavenly lessons or omens. Today, however, some researchers view these images differently. They ask a provocative question: what if the artists were not painting symbols, but what they actually saw? Not angels, but objects. Not miracles, but unknown phenomena. During the Renaissance, paintings began to include curious disc-like forms in the sky. In the artwork Madonna with Saint Giovannino, for example, a small object resembling a luminous disc appears in the upper portion of the composition. Some interpret it as an allegory of divine presence. Others see in it a possible hint of something far more unusual. Similar elements appear in other works of religious art. Yet caution is necessary. Artists of the past relied heavily on symbolism. Clouds, radiant circles, beams of light. These were part of the visual language of the time. They do not automatically imply technological crafts. And still, monastic chronicles do contain descriptions of celestial phenomena that are difficult to explain with certainty. Light is moving against the wind, glows hovering above monasteries, strange sounds accompanying brilliance in the night sky. In those centuries, every unusual occurrence was filtered through a religious lens. Angels, demons, harbingers of disaster. People did not possess the scientific framework to interpret such events differently. But here is what makes these accounts intriguing. Many of them were recorded carefully and in detail: date, location, witnesses, sometimes even attempts to describe the trajectory of movement. If such documents exist in their original form, carefully preserved within archival collections, it is reasonable to assume that at least some could reside within the Vatican Apostolic Archive. After all, it was there that documents from across the Catholic world eventually converged. And here is where doubt begins to take shape. Were these angels, meteors, atmospheric phenomena, or something else entirely? We look at the past through modern lenses. We know the term UFO. People in the 16th century did not. They described what they saw using the language available to them, shaped by their worldview. But if such phenomena were documented for centuries, where are the original records now? Once again, the answer leads us back to the archive. And at this point, more daring theories begin to emerge. Theories suggest that the story does not end with ancient chronicles. That may extend to reports of contact, to concealed documentation, to 20th century records that have never been fully revealed. When the conversation turns to the Vatican and UFOs, it quickly moves beyond academic discussion and into the realm of speculation. This is where the loudest theories emerge. This is where mystery begins to take on a life of its own. One of the most widespread claims suggests that the Vatican possesses information about crashes of unidentified aerial objects in the 20th century. In various publications, there are references to the idea that even before the events in Roswell, alleged incidents involving strange crafts may have occurred in Europe. According to these narratives, some of that information could have reached the archives through diplomatic channels or ecclesiastical networks. Certain authors go further, suggesting that the Vatican may have cooperated with governments in studying anomalous phenomena. The logic behind these theories rests on the Church's global network of contacts, its diplomatic missions, and its centuries-long experience in handling information. If something extraordinary happened somewhere in the world, information might have been transmitted not only to state authorities, but also to the Holy See. There are even more daring assertions. Some conspiracy-oriented sources speak of classified 20th century documents allegedly describing encounters with non-human intelligence. They refer to secret commissions, closed theological debates, and even specialized departments said to study the UFO phenomenon. And this leads to a deeper question. If we imagine that contact with an extraterrestrial civilization was someday officially confirmed, what would truly change? How would the religious worldview shift? What would happen to theology, to faith, to humanity's understanding of its place in the universe? Imagine, just for a moment, that tomorrow undeniable proof of an intelligent extraterrestrial civilization is presented to the world. Not rumors, not blurry footage, but a fact recognized by the global scientific community. What would happen to religion? At first glance, it might seem like a blow to faith. But if we look more closely, the picture is far less dramatic. Christian theology has reflected for centuries on the vastness of creation. A God who creates the universe is not limited to a single planet. If the universe is immense, perhaps even boundless, why must life exist only here? Within theological circles, the question has been raised. Would hypothetical extraterrestrials possess a soul? If they are intelligent, capable of free will and moral choice, could they be considered spiritual beings? Or would they belong to an entirely different dimension of divine intention? Another profound question follows. Would they require salvation? If Christ became incarnate on earth, does his mission extend to the entire cosmos? Or might other worlds have their own form of revelation? It may sound speculative, even fantastical, yet such reflections genuinely exist within theological thought. Some theologians suggest that contact with an extraterrestrial civilization would not destroy faith, but expand its horizons. Humanity would no longer appear to be the absolute center of creation, yet it would remain part of it. And here lies a subtle point. If such questions are already being discussed at a theological level, Is it possible that the Church is quietly preparing itself for discoveries that may one day arrive? We began with the image of an archive that knows too much, a place where history is carefully arranged into folders and centuries, with the feeling that somewhere inside, an answer might be waiting. Does the Vatican conceal evidence of contact with non-human intelligence? It is possible that within the archives there are descriptions of strange, celestial phenomena. It is possible that certain documents will one day be reinterpreted in the light of new knowledge. And yet, perhaps the greatest mystery does not lie in the archive at all. Perhaps it lies in our need to believe in a hidden truth, in the feeling that somewhere there exists a piece of knowledge capable of explaining everything at once, something that would confirm that reality is far more mysterious than we imagine. The Vatican, with its vast archives, has become a symbol of that longing, a symbol of doors behind which ultimate truth is believed to be concealed. But as long as those doors remain closed to the majority, certainty will remain out of reach, and the mystery will continue to live not only in stone walls and documents, but in the human imagination itself.